think we can. Great. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today in this breakout room discussion, which will be focusing on the challenges and opportunities of open access. So joining us today, we have Dina Guth from, who is the acting manager for the research grants portfolio at the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. So thank you so much for being here to help facilitate this discussion, Dina. So she'll be here to help guide the discussion and answer some of your questions. And I'm now going to invite Dina to introduce herself.
Thank you, Vanessa. Donc, merci, bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis très heureuse d'être avec vous. Et je veux premièrement inviter vous de parler dans la langue officielle de votre choix. Je vais parler en général en anglais, mais je suis très heureuse de répondre à toutes les questions en français aussi. So thank you everybody for being here. It's quite a pleasure to be with you today. I am Dina Guth, acting manager in the research grants portfolio at the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, and very happy to discuss open access and related issues with this group. Okay.
Great, thank you so much. So I'd now like to open the floor for any comments or questions. Please feel free to share your experiences, any challenges or lessons learned that your association has had in the area of open access, or feel free to pose any questions either in the chat or by raising your Zoom hand or just unmuting yourself and talking. So thank you very much. Maybe to get us started, I know that we have with us today the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Learned Journals, Caroline Fast. Not to put you too much on the spot, Caroline, but would you like to talk a little bit maybe about your association's work in this field? I think you might be particularly suited to this subject.
Well, I think our association is suited to this subject, thank you, but I'm not sure I am yet. I'm still a new executive director and learning my way, but I was just madly looking up some things to see what I could recommend. Of course, I know there has been lots and lots of discussion about this and for quite a long period of time. And so I was thinking that a short form to give you an answer might be to recommend, I'm just pulling that up now, recommend just a very brief blog post actually in the Scholarly Kitchen. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but through the Society for Scholarly Publishing, they publish a blog. And there was a post on January the 11th that included one of our members. And I can try and drop that into the chat, see if I can manage that, called Perspectives on a Unified Approach to the Future of Open Access. And it's a very brief read, but it gives a librarian's perspective and a publisher's perspective. And so it's a very short form, a quick thumbnail sketch of what the issues are and what the perspectives are. I think that would be better for me to refer you to the writings of our members rather than trying to make a comment myself. But I think in the critical issue, I think, is how do published journals maintain their sustainability with open access. They have subscriptions and they have production and they bring research in and they want to respect that research. And how do they do that in an open access context? So developing new funding models, I think, is one aspect. Which I know they speak about. We developed some webinars and so on about that sort of thing. So I think it's a broad set of issues. I think the goal is always the same, is to provide as much access to learning and to research as possible. But how do you do that and maintain your publications, for instance? So we have about 135 members, and some are open access only, some are print, some are online. So there's quite a mix of models, and how do you move forward in that context? So if I can defer to our members' expertise, that would be my preference at this point, so I don't speak out of turn. So I can post the link to that little blog post, and that it's just a small item that would get you thinking. So Thank you. See if I can get it in there.
Yeah, Jennifer,
There we
feel
go.
free to speak.
Yeah, I'm just going to say a couple of things. I'm actually I'm now on the board of the Federation. I'm the ex-president of Acute. I was the president of Acute from 2018 to 2020, but I actually attended my first SSHRC meeting about open access around 2000. So I know how long this has been going on. And I think Carolyn's comment about the challenges of funding are probably the fundamental issue. So I'd be curious if Dina has specific suggestions about how SSHRC is going to do this, because my sense historically has been SSHRC has really shied away from trying to fund it, because the reality is that a lot of journals rely on subscriptions, particularly library subscriptions, to keep afloat, and also rely on SSHRC funds, usually like journal funding. I ran a journal for 10 years, so I know how that stuff works. And I think it's a really tricky situation. And I know there's been a lot of pressure applied to journals to create open access, but there hasn't been a lot of infrastructure to support it. So that would be my question to Dina, is what's the infrastructure going to be to support it, as opposed to words? If I don't, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but it's such a long conversation. I mean, I feel like I said, 99, 98, I think was when I first started hearing about this stuff. So that tells you, and it tells you I'm old too. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. Am I just going to respond, Vanessa? Is that okay? All right. Yeah. So yeah, that definitely struck a chord with me. I know that this conversation has been going on for a really long time at SSHRC, and I think it's worth pointing out that as we've had this conversation, we've realized that all journals operate differently, right? There's so much difference between and variety, and I think especially in the social sciences and humanities, there's quite a range of different types of journals, different types of business models, and trying to and each one is going to have a slightly different solution. And I think I've heard that kind of repeated over and over in all of the discussions that I've come across on open access, is that every journal is, maybe not have to rethink the wheel, but in some cases it is going to have to think about, where it is and what community it's serving in terms of looking at solutions. In terms of infrastructure, that's I think we are moving a little bit in that direction. We do acknowledge that the infrastructure to support open access does need to be supported, and we do need to think about that. So for example, a few years ago, SSHRC opened a funding for the Pan-Canadian Knowledge Access Initiative, which is currently supporting Erudit and the public, the publi.ca, to kind of do some research in this space, and also to try to build this infrastructure. But I think even further than that, it's quite a long process, and I think it's not going to be, government is not going to be the only part of this solution, right? There's going to be a lot of players involved. There's also the libraries. There's also the Canadian Research Knowledge Initiative, which is now working on transformative agreements, and that's going to be part of the solution. So I think there's a number of kind of different angles to try to mobilize the resources to build some kind of solutions for this.
Great, thank you so much, Dina. I think that the next hand I saw go up was Neil. If you want to go next, Neil.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm the president of the Canadian Association of Geographers, and we have a journal published through Wiley. And we're in the midst, we're kind of coming to the end of our present contract. And so we're in negotiations now to see if we'll continue on with Wiley. One of the things they're really pushing is something that is called transitional agreements. And these would be sort of almost like a subscription that universities would purchase to allow unlimited read access to the full slate of the publisher's portfolio of journals. And it would also provide some funds to cover, page charges and that kind of thing. It's just something that they've tossed at us, and it's new to us. They're not all that common in Canada, but apparently they are. There are examples in the UK and Germany and the US. But I was just wondering if anybody here had any experience with this or any thoughts about this as a way to enhance open access publishing. Because at the moment, typically we put out 4 issues a year. Typically 1 or 2 of the articles are open access because the authors have the funding for that kind of thing, either through tri-council funding or some other sort of funding, or through their institution paying for the fees. What we notice, of course, is that citations and downloads and all those things tend to be higher for those articles. So we can sort of see the impetus for both the publisher and for the editors and for us as an association to promote this. But just wanted to throw that out there. Is anybody aware of something like a transitional agreement, and whether there's any movement afoot to develop these in Canada?
I was just going to say that if there's something that we don't have an answer to, I'd be happy to take that back to my board and see what I can find out and send it through, I guess, to Vanessa. Would I send any information to you?
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure. I'm happy to pass along info that you find after the end of the session.
I can't answer that. I do know that they have looked at something called delayed open access, where they would have a 12-month delay of publication. And I don't know how commonly that's known. But I can get a little bit more detail, and I'm happy to pass that along as to what our members know. Can't answer it, but I can get you help, I think. So
Thanks, much appreciated.
Okay.
Did anyone else have any thoughts on that question or comments?
I just have a question for Neil. Have you done any analysis to see if it's self-citations or if they're cited by other sources more broadly than the authors or those connected to the authors?
Yeah, well, I'm just going on the impressions of my chief editor or editor-in-chief, who sees the metrics, and there's a very clear advantage, I suppose, according to our editor-in-chief anyway, of the open access. And some of our most cited and downloaded papers over a long period of time have been open access. I don't know the degree to which they filtered out self-citation and that kind of thing, but I think the impact is sufficiently large that probably exceeds, those kinds of things.
Thank you. I was just thinking, because we have an entirely open access journal. So for us, it would be paywalling some of them or embargoing some of them behind a paywall for a certain period of time. But my understanding is you have most of yours paywalled, with some where the authors pay for open access. Is that the model?
There's an option for authors. Anybody publishing with us, there's an option to have it done open access if you've got the funds for that. but otherwise you just put it through the paywall. The publisher also allows the editor to identify 2 articles per month, which are, I think the term is full read or something. So for a month, anybody can get around the paywall for a couple of articles, but then that ends and it just moves to other articles. It's a way to promote, but articles that are behind that paywall. But that's the way we work. So some issues might not have any open access, and some may have 3 or 4. It just depends on who's got the funds and so on. But for now, the minority of our articles are open access.
Great, thank you so much. So I think Mona was next.
Thank you. So I just wonder if someone can talk a little bit about open access books. How common are they at this point? The pros and cons, perhaps, whether these books, what kinds of publishers are doing this, self-publishing perhaps, which, my 18-year-old son says would be great. And then also in terms of vetting, I'm thinking also of promotion. Do these things count less or more? Does it depend on who's doing it? I don't really know much about it. I've only used a couple of open access books in my work. And so I'm just curious if someone can talk a bit more about that, please.
I can say a little bit from the Federation's point of view. I'm Gabe. I'm the CEO of the Federation. I've learned an awful lot about open access, especially as it relates to books in the last couple of years, although that still means I can't answer lots of questions. But and maybe I'll just start with saying a few words about how we've been involved. The Federation, as you probably know, manages a book grant program that helps fund about 180 books, scholarly books every year. The vast majority of those are grants that are delivered through Canadian university presses. Authors can apply individually, but almost all of our grants are distributed through the presses, and the authors work through them. And in the last couple of years, we've been working on a plan to incorporate support for open access into that program. And we actually have quite an extensive piece of research that should be coming out, I would hope, in the next couple of months, that's been done for us by Vincent Larivière at the University of Montreal, where he's looked at the state of scholarly books generally and their role in academia, both kind of their function, but also the trends in terms of how many are being produced and opportunities to author them, but then also what open access could mean for them. So the experience with books is much less extensive than it's been with journals. But we are learning. There are university presses in Canada that specialize in open access publishing, and I'll make sure I confirm this, but I think Athabasca, I believe the University of Calgary press is primarily open access. If someone's on the call and knows I'm wrong about that, feel free to correct me, and there's a couple of others. But the percentage of scholarly books in Canada that are being published as open access is a tiny percentage, like I'd say certainly less than 10%. But we know that SSHRC, as the most important research funder in the country, is anxious to see barriers to accessing that knowledge removed, in terms of upfront paying for access. So I think there's going to be more and more experimentation in that area. And what we're hearing, I think, from our scholars is people are anxious for as big an audience as possible to see their work and for it to be shareable. Books present some challenges that journal articles don't because of their length, and the technology for kind of making them searchable and findable is not the same as at this point as it is for journals. But I think we're going to see an acceleration of this in the next few years. So I don't know if that's helpful, but others might have more direct experiences as authors or as publishers of books on the call.
I'm sorry, I have to just head off to a board meeting. I let Vanessa know when I came on that I only had till 11, but I'll put my my email into the box. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to send a note and I'll see what I can find out for you. So very nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Vanessa, can I just add something to that, what Gabe said? Two things. First of all, there's a difference between an ebook and an online open access book. So that's a distinction that I think a lot of presses will do the ebook fairly easily. The open access book is a lot more complicated. I can tell you right now, I published 2 books with U of T. I'm now publishing a book with Palgrave. Palgrave wanted $20,000 US to make it open access and basically said, if you can pay that, we'll do it. And if not, we'll just make it into an ebook. I'm not going to do it. Even if I got a SSHRC grant, I wouldn't spend that much money on it. But I think it's an important piece to think about, is that there's definitely this kind of profit-making thing that is going on internationally around open access books. And if you're not someone who has a very big grant, and in the social sciences and humanities, grants are far smaller than the kinds of grants you'll see through, say, NSERC, you're not going to have probably the resource to do it unless you've got some kind of major subvention. And that's why, I mean, ASPP makes a lot of sense in terms of a support structure, but I don't know what the actual cost would be at the presses for the open access. I don't know what they actually charge, or whether they do build in a charge, and whether it's as close to what Palgrave might quote. So that was something I just want to mention, because I think it's really important to make all those distinctions.
If I can add, I think that there's a lot of research that we're interested in that's coming out of Europe on this issue. I don't know how many people on this call know of Plan S, which is the move to immediate open access, and a lot of the research funding agencies in Europe have signed on to that. And there's actually a monograph piece to that as well. So they are also now requiring books published by researchers who are funded by the Plan S funding agencies now to be made in immediate open access. And it'll be interesting to see kind of what the results are. I think, you know, that's very right, that the business model for books is quite different, and will require some different thinking around that. But I think that, you know, sort of the preliminary research also shows that that bump in, you know, downloads and citations also is true for books. So there may be some, you know, benefits there as well. And we just kind of, I don't think, you know, the journey for books has been a little bit slower than for journals. So it's just now that we're kind of starting to learn more about what it's going to look like and what it's going to mean.
Great. Thank you so much. Did anyone else have any thoughts on this topic before we move on to David's question?
Can I ask one more follow-up question? I'm just, as we're talking about open access, especially versus ebooks, I'm thinking about, you know, when I'm looking to see if a student has plagiarized and I stick something in Google, it comes up on 6 sites because people keep copying and copying and copying. Are there any concerns around people's published work in an open access format being just copied and copied wherever it wants to be on the internet, as opposed to protecting copyright? It may be a moot question, I don't know.
If I may, that's a really interesting question. I think that this isn't something that the tri-agencies have spoken out about, but for example, I just mentioned Plan S, and they do require a certain Creative Commons license, and for the license to be open. So oftentimes that openness to reuse is actually part of the open access conversation. And, you know, maybe I'll throw it out to the group. It's a really interesting piece to think about, and you know, whether that works. There are some arguments that say in social sciences and humanities disciplines where the article is the research, right? We need to be a little bit more conscious of that than in the science and medical disciplines where that's not really so much of an issue. But interesting thoughts.
Very good, interesting conversation happening. Thank you. So David, would you like to pose a question?
First of all, I want to thank everybody for what's turning out to be a very informative discussion for me, and especially confirming for me that unfortunately too much of what is called open access is not open access, at least not as far as authors are concerned. It may be open access for readers. And certainly in my discipline of history of mathematics and science, there's not much funding available, especially to many of the historians are retirees from the discipline, so they don't have any institutional support at all. So my question, though, comes from experience in 3 different societies, which have 3 very different approaches to publication. In the Canadian Society for the History and Philosophy of Science, there's no connected publication besides from our internal members bulletin. In the Canadian Society for the History and Philosophy of Mathematics, of which I'm the treasurer, so I actually pay the subscriptions, we have organic connections to 3 journals which come out in different ways and from 3 different external publishers, and none of which are open access, because I know I have to pay the individual member subscriptions to the publishers. And also, I'm a member of the Canadian Society, Canadian Science, Technology, and Historical Association, which I think at the moment is no longer a member of Federation. We've gone purely electronic there and open access through ARD with a very small, low budget organization, works very well. I think we get funding through the access from institutions, but individuals have no problem. And another way that we publish, and quite a variety of the range of formality, informality, is through a regular blog. And often we use that to promote our journal. And as far as going back for history of philosophy of math, we also have an annual, the Annals, for our members to publish in peer-reviewed, and it's totally under our control, except that the actual physical publishing goes to Springer. And Springer has, in his website, generally been suggesting, not specifically to us, how great open access is. I think the reason is that they get to charge on the order of $20,000 a book. So my question would be, how could the Federation help societies realize what our options are and what they're tending to become, and help us then carry out what we would like to do with our publication?
Maybe I'll just speak briefly to it. I think it's a great question, and it's part of what inspired, apart from people actually saying this was a topic they wanted to talk about, part of what inspired us to say, let's make this one of our conversations, because I think there's really 2 aspects, I think, of this issue going forward. One is money. So getting more money for people to be able to provide, access to their journals without payment. And, I think it's pretty clear that there are costs associated with doing this work. And if we don't have upfront subscription fees, then there have to be other ways of replacing that. SSHRC did increase, I'd say modestly, the funding provided through its journal program. And I think one of the roles of the Federation is to continue to work with SSHRC to make sure that that program grows to reflect the costs of publishing in an open access format. But I think the other piece, and I think it's really critical right now, is that and perhaps working with SSHRC, but certainly working with the community to share the results and insights that are being gained right now from the transition that people have been making over the past few years. And I'm not aware, Dina, I'm not sure if you are, of anywhere where kind of the overall results and lessons from what journals and associations have been doing the last few years are being gathered. But I think working with the community to compile that information so that people aren't just benefiting from their own experience, but you can benefit from the other 80 associations in the Federation, that seems like a natural place for this conversation to go.
Oh, is there anything specifically on open access at Congress?
Yeah, I think we do have something on the agenda this year with a group called Inky, who we've worked with several times in the past, and directly addressing this question. So I'm not sure if that programming information has been published yet, but it'll be made available in the Congress program as soon as it's confirmed.
That's it. Oh, related to that, I've started looking at the open sessions. There are just too many to follow up all the ones that may connect with my interests or interests of members of the societies I'm involved with. Now, that's a good problem. Particularly, is there any way of being able to search by date and time? That'd be helpful on the open sessions.
I believe that is possible, and if I also believe that the open sessions are recorded for the most part and are accessible to attendees. I think last year it was 30 days after Congress ended. So if you aren't able to attend certain open events, there should be recordings available.
Does that also apply to the society open sessions?
That's a very good question. I will definitely get back to you on, Tiffany, did you want to jump in on that?
Yes, 100%. Hi, David. I'm Tiffany, event planner here at the Federation. I'm also leading the process on open events, so I'm happy to jump in here. So yes, the open event calendar on the actual Congress website, it should be filterable by date and time. We are working with our website provider. Yeah, we're working with our website provider to update that filter because we did tell them that we wanted that filter and it didn't get transferred over. So we are working with them to get that fixed for you. And yes, to refer to what Vanessa was saying, all the open events are available to all registered Congress attendees on the virtual platform. The virtual platform will remain open for just 2 weeks this year instead of the 30 days. So anything that is archived and recorded, and we have permission to have it archived and displayed on the virtual platform, anyone can go back and watch that at their leisure until June 3rd, 2022.
Still wasn't clear to me your answer about, say, the 2 open sessions that History of Philosophy and Math is offering.
Yes.
Will they be recorded?
If you would like them to be recorded, yes. The main default is yes, we are recording unless you specifically say no, due to either speaker wishes, or maybe it's a you don't want it archived for any other reason. Yeah.
Okay. So that gives me a task. That gives me about half a dozen people have to check with.
Okay, yeah, for sure. There is also the option, if that speaker specifically doesn't want to be recorded, we can pause the recording and then resume the recording. We just need those instructions based on the session presenters and you, the organizer.
Thanks very much.
Of course, yeah, happy to help. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Tiffany. Dina, was there anything that you wanted to comment on that subject we were discussing earlier, or do we think we're going to move on to any other topics of discussion before we wrap up? I think I'm not sure if I thought maybe if you wanted to add anything to what Gabe was talking about earlier, Dina, or in relation to David's question.
Um,
If not, that's okay, sorry. Not to put you on the spot.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so I mean, again, I think, you know, it's an interesting point to raise, and I think it kind of raises again this issue that each journal and each association is, you know, very, very different. And certainly the engagement that Shirk has done over the years, and the long process that, you know, in terms of engaging with stakeholders to move the Age of Scholarly Journal program to an open access model. We heard a lot about the very different approaches and business models that journals use, and the different you know, relationships that they have with the association. Sometimes it's the association that funds the journal. Sometimes it's the journal proceeds that kind of feed back into the association. And there are a number of different types of models there as well. So I think this is all, you know, something that is worth considering. I think the link that Carolyn gave to the Scholarly Kitchen, they're also part of the Society for Scholarly Publishing, which I think hosts a lot of talks and a lot of webinars on this space. And they may even have a kind of collective of the US journals, I think, to talk precisely about these issues and kind of to talk about best practices and how journals have moved to open access and what thing, you know, has worked and has not. And I think, you know, that's something that would be really cool to also see here. And I, you know, I'm sorry to see that Carolyn has left, because I think that CALJ has also been doing a lot of work in that space. So she might be actually a really good resource for that as well.
Great, thank you so much. And just on that topic, so we did share some advanced materials ahead of time with some links that Dina shared, and we'll be definitely sharing those again along with the meeting summary and the recordings of these discussions. So I might add some of those links that were dropped into chat today as well. So I think before we wrap up, were there any last comments before we head back to the main discussion for the closing remarks? No, great. Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time to discuss this topic with us, and we'll see you back in the main room. So you can just click leave room now. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you.